Stephen Aishman from SCAD. SCAD, I actually am not sure how long you've been in Hong Kong, but I know it's not that long.
2 years.
2 years. I'm wondering, first of all, I know that you're a photographer.
Yes.
Could you tell me a little bit about your practice and how you came to be at SCAD?
Yeah, absolutely. So, how did I come to be at SCAD? I'm a professional photographer, but my first degree is in astrophysics. So I went to Princeton, and I have a degree in astrophysics, and I worked as an astrophysicist for a number of years. So I'm very interested in how people visualize the world around them. And I was teaching for a number of years up in Boston. So I've taught at Harvard and the Museum School and Tufts and things like that. Then SCAD offered me a great position, so I went to go teach at SCAD, and we have multiple campuses all around the globe. So I taught at the Savannah campus. They opened the Atlanta campus, and I went up and I was the chair of the photography department at the Atlanta campus. I taught at the Lacoste campus and online. And then they decided to open here in Hong Kong, and so they sent me to come help launch the degree program here. So I teach in the photography program with my colleague Yoav Haresh, and we launched the program.
Wow. Do you know why they decided to launch here? I mean, at the time, I guess there was a lot of things happening in Hong Kong, but now there's even more.
Yeah.
Was that a vision they'd had, or did they have good information?
Well, I think SCAD was participating with Hong Kong's vision of creativity and how to have arts enter into Hong Kong more in the long term. So SCAD was looking to have an established place, someplace in Asia for sure, because they're very interested in how to work with Asian clients, how to work with Asian creativity. And the match with Hong Kong was just perfect. I think the timing was perfect. I think Hong Kong is obviously launching to a much broader spectrum for the arts and creativity in general. And SCAD was interested in being the university for creative careers. So if people are interested in learning more about how to learn creativity, then they had a place to come. And I think the Hong Kong government was very open and responsive to that.
It's an interesting concept to learn creativity. Do you think it's something that is already present locally? I mean, in its own form, I'm sure, but is there a new model that you're trying to introduce? Or?
Wow, that's a great question. So I think the real key is for people to really see that creativity can be taught. That's something that people kind of have to get over this hurdle. And it's really interesting. While I've been in Hong Kong, and of course all around the world, I've met so many different people and lectured at so many different places, and they'll come up afterward and they'll be like, well, you know, I'm not creative, but I'm very interested in the arts. I'll be like, oh, what do you do? And they'll say, oh, I'm an engineer. I'm like, so what do you do all day? Oh, I design new airfoils for planes. I'm like, really? You're not creative. You design new airfoils. Or they'll be a businessman, and they'll be like, yeah, I work at Citibank, and I'm just a businessman, and I'm not very interested in, I'm interested in arts, but I don't know much about creativity. And I ask them, well, so what do you do all day? And they say, oh, well, I come up with new financial instruments for my clients. I'm like, yeah, that's creative. That's a creative field. And I think that there is something innate to humans all around the world, including here in Hong Kong, that have elements of creativity, but maybe have boxed it in the wrong way. And so sort of one of my goals as a professor here in Hong Kong is to help people understand that you can let that out and that innovation is unbelievably lucrative. Like, there is something to Hong Kong's creativity in particular where if people want to take creativity and harness it for financial uses, you can do that too. You can teach that too. And I'm very interested in how to fit creativity into Hong Kong's culture and feed off of Hong Kong's innate culture of creativity that simply hasn't been phrased that way before.
I guess that's also sort of building on your own background of having an alternative sort of career previously. How did you make that shift? What was it that made you want to become a professional photographer rather than stick with astrophysics?
Well, that's a really interesting question. So I was studying astrophysics, and in particular what I was interested in is this thing called large-scale gravitational instability theory. It's basically why things collect or why stars form and stuff like that. And I was producing these papers, and my goal, like most people who study science or astrophysics in particular, was to learn more and more and more about the universe, learn more and more about the world around me, and then share it with more and more people. Well, turns out that's not really how research science works. And as I was studying and, preparing to go on and get a PhD, I was finding that I was getting the same jobs over and over again. I was getting very good at this one specific thing. And that's really what people do, is they get really good at like one specific thing. So I was learning more and more and more about less and less and less. And then I was writing these papers that like only 2 or 3 people could read. So if I was trying to learn more and more and more and share with more and more people, I was learning more and more about less and less and less and sharing with less and less and less. So really, astrophysics in particular is really just using, well, satellites are just large cameras. The Hubble Space Telescope is just a big camera. It's about looking at the world around you, interpreting what you see, and sharing it with others. So really all I did was just change my language. I was always interested in the same thing, looking at the world and sharing it with others. I just cut out the middleman of the physics and the math so that I can speak to a larger audience.
Right. And did your message change? Like, as you're taking photos and as you're building on the creative sort of processes, have you been photographing things and been interested in things which are a world away from astrophysics, or is that something that's stuck with you?
I think that I think each project always deals with something that's a little bit different, and so, well, like anyone, you get tired of talking about the same thing over and over again. So the subject matter definitely has changed. Plus, my goal was to learn more about the world around me and the universe around me. And so, inevitably, as I've learned more, it's changed my perspective. It's changed my point of view. I've changed. So, yes, my work has changed since I was working strictly in physics in particular. But I think the core has always been the same, and the desire has always been the same.
How I'm interested, because I also just moved to Hong Kong last year, so I'm very new to the city, although I've visited before. I'm wondering, what sort of inspiration are you getting for your own sort of work, or the way that you're seeing your work in a city like Hong Kong?
Well, I actually, my colleague and I, Yoav Haresh, just had an opening last night at the JCCAC, so the Jockey Club Art Center up in Shep Kip Mei. And so we just opened our latest body of work. And my inspiration has been very, very clear for this. I don't even call it a body of work, but it's my son, it's my family. And what I found is that as I travel around the world, I understand my relationships to my loved ones in a much more clear way. I think there is something to being an expat, to coming here and seeing how other cultures work, how other people function with one another, and I've really re-entrenched in the way that I understand my own love for my family and love for people around me. And really that's what the work is about that we're showing.
Right. That's not really what I was expecting, so that's a real surprise. But it makes me think about community. And I'm wondering how you sort of bridge that gap as an institution that's coming into Hong Kong, obviously from a very different context, and you have a very international, SCAD has a very international sort of perspective. What sort of things has the institution tried to do, or what sort of approaches has it implemented to make a place for itself here?
That's a fantastic question, and the school's really thought about this. That's what the entire book launch that we had. So SCAD put together a book called Tilting the Lens, where fundamentally this is what happened. We opened the school, and the school, SCAD Hong Kong, is in Sham Shui Po, which is a very unique and interesting location. A lot of people in Hong Kong have a certain preconceived notion about what the neighborhood is like. And it's fascinating, of course, the way that the neighborhood interacts with the school.
What's that like? Just for people who are here not from Hong Kong?
Sham Shui Po?
What sort of notions do you think people bring to it?
Well, Sham Shui Po is the most financially depressed neighborhood in Hong Kong. Certainly one of them, consistently. And so it also has an open street market, and it is considered a rougher neighborhood. And I think there's a lot of baggage that goes along with that is historical baggage that maybe isn't even applicable today. And I think most neighborhoods that are, attempting to gentrify or attempting to remodel themselves have to deal with this baggage of the past in some way. And their characterization. And Sham Shui Po, I think, is one of those neighborhoods. It has this amazing culture and these amazing people. And so the school opened in Sham Shui Po, and of course the neighborhood affects the culture of the school. The students are constantly going in and out of the neighborhood. They have to in order to physically get into the school. And when the school opened, the neighborhood was so warm and so welcoming and so inviting that basically the school wanted to put together a tribute to how awesome the neighborhood is, for lack of a better term.
How did they invite you? I mean, I'm not sure, but in Hong Kong, I feel like often people are inviting by simply not really caring that you're there. So they'll basically ignore you, but it's a friendly kind of way of ignoring you. So in what ways did they kind of make a warm atmosphere for the school?
The book, Tilting the Lens, is filled with these stories of exactly what we mean by that, how warm and inviting the people were. And the students started coming in with these amazing stories. As you can imagine, I'm a photography professor, so a lot of my students were in photographing. They were photographing the shop stalls, and the students, of course, most of them from the West certainly, didn't speak Cantonese. And they would take a picture and then come back with the picture and show it to the shop owner. Eventually, some of our students became so well known in the neighborhood and are so well known in the neighborhood that they can't even buy anything. They go into stores and people are like, oh, here you go, have some cakes, have something, because they've been there and they've gotten to know the shop owners so well. And that's what I mean by warm and inviting. I mean, like, literally, the students are in photographing, dealing with people, and people are inviting them in and saying, please participate in our community. You've become an integral part of our community in a really, really positive way. So it's not even like you're talking about, kind of a welcoming apathy. It's actually just open welcome. It's really, really pretty fascinating, the interaction that the students have had. Of course, part of that is the fact that the students are spending money down in the neighborhood. I mean, people aren't stupid either. But that's an important part, too. They're customers. They're supporting the neighborhood. And they really love the neighborhood. And the book is filled with those kind of rich stories.
How many students are coming into Hong Kong from overseas, for example, as opposed to the number of local students? What's the balance there?
You know, doing the math is really pretty difficult because we have students from all over the world on all of the campuses, so they truly are international. Also, the campuses, the school is designed so that students don't have to transfer between campuses. They can simply just move from one campus to the next. In fact, they're not even called campuses, they're locations. So they can easily transverse between locations. So subsequently, it becomes very complex. Actually, very much like Hong Kong. It's like asking people where they're from in Hong Kong, and you always get this elaborate story, right? Where it's, oh, well, I'm a British citizen, but I'm of Indian descent, but I've lived in Hong Kong my whole life, so you tell me where I'm from. A lot of our students are exactly like that. A number of our students, particularly from the U.S., of course, come over for 1 quarter in order to experience Hong Kong, and usually they end up falling in love with Hong Kong and staying and deciding they want to graduate from this location. I'd have to say right now, maybe a quarter of my students are from the U.S., maybe a half, but it's so hard to count. And also then you ask if they're versus the local students. Quite frankly, I have trouble counting the local students subsequently, right? Where I'm like, oh, you're British, but you've lived in Hong Kong your whole life. Are you local? I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess in that sense, it's a reflection of what's happening in Hong Kong and the changes. I'm getting told about time, unfortunately, but to ask a little bit more about the book, Tilting the Lens, is it a heritage sort of project as well, or is it trying to capture like where the location, where the area is moving?
Wow, that's a tough question to answer quickly because it's a combination. Inevitably, when our students were out photographing and dealing with Sham Shui Po as a neighborhood, so much of Sham Shui Po is historical. We have these historical Tong Lao, beautiful architecture that have been there for over a century now. But it's all about change. All of Hong Kong's about change. So I think it's more of a snapshot of the feel of the neighborhood, which is both about holding on to tradition while moving it forward into the future. So it's a combination.
Right. Okay. I'm afraid that's going to be everything we can talk about today.
Yeah.
I'm sure. It seems like there's a lot more to go into. Thank you very much for joining us. This is Steve Aishman from SCAD, talking to us about Tilting the Lens, your new book project. Do you have a booth here?
We don't have a booth.
No? So where can we find the book?
So you can purchase the book at, I pronounce it Dimox, but apparently...
Dimmicks.
Yeah, exactly. British people say it's Dimmicks. I'll call it Dimmicks. Or Relay, or you can, it's available online through ShopSCAD as well. So you can go to scad.edu, find ShopSCAD, and order it. Or pick it up at Dimox. I'm American.
No one will find it that way. Warning. Okay. Thank you very much,
Great,
Steve.
thank you.
Let me get you...